Hey, it's Amy Shaw here. I want to talk about community today and specifically the distinction between community and village. It's really important. I'm reading this book and it's an awesome book. I love autobiographies. They're probably one of my favorite things to read. And I want to share with you, I'm going to read a little bit out of it. The book is called Secrets of the Talking Jaguar, a Mayan shaman's journey to the heart of the indigenous soul. The author is Martin Prechel. I'm not exactly sure how to say his name, but it's a really amazing book, and I'm having a hard time actually putting it down. I love to read, but I'm very, very busy, so reading can be challenging for me, but this book has actually been coming with me everywhere, so the cover of it's getting already worn off. I got it actually at the half-price bookstore in the shamanism section. I was just browsing there one day, and it happened to be there, and I don't know why somebody gave this gem up because it's amazing. I love it, and I'm about to read for you out of it. So before I do that, I just wanted to show you really quick this stack of books. Like I said, I'm a reader, and they were kind of piling up all over. Some of these books are books that I'm still actually in the middle of reading or just finished reading, or they're brand new books that I just got. I got a nice few of these for Mother's Day as gifts, and so yeah, I definitely have a collecting stack, and I just brought them in here into the library where they are. So that's just a small taste of the kind of stuff that I read. I had to actually put my Dispelling Wetiko book up for a moment. I'm a little bit more than halfway through it, but I just started to get really sort of bogged down and overwhelmed with it. It's repetitive, but it's heavy, and I just needed a little bit of break. So I took a break to start this book, and I'm so glad I did. I love it. It's just awesome. So I'm going to read a little bit of it to you, actually. So this is a story of a white man, a gringo, who found his way to Guatemala, and he just has a very indigenous soul. He was looking for a certain thing, and I think he found it. He got into Guatemala, and he ended up at this village where he found himself living with a shaman. And so he didn't know it perhaps at the time that he would probably spend several decades actually living with and studying with this Mayan shaman in Guatemala. So at this point in the book, he's just arrived in this village. It's a long story how he got there. It's really interesting, though. If you want to check the book out, I highly recommend you do it. But he's in this village. He doesn't have a lot of money, and he obviously doesn't have a job, so he's kind of trying to find his place. So that's kind of what's going on. So I'll pick up from that point. For 3 whole days, I searched in vain for a hut to rent, thinking I could just walk into such a village and say that I lived there. In those days, this concept seemed bizarre to the regular villager. First off, none of the women understood Spanish. If they did, they wouldn't speak it, and I didn't speak any Mayan yet. If the women didn't understand or want what you were asking for, it didn't happen. A few of the men spoke Spanish, but most didn't, and the few who were willing to listen to me seemed baffled by my request. "Excuse me, but did you say you want to give me money to live in my house alone?" "Yes, that's right," I would reply. "Well, where are my people supposed to live?" "In another house," I would say. "What other house?" they would ask. "One that's not being used," I'd answer. "Well, why don't you live there instead?" they'd ask. "Where is it then?" I would ask. "There is no such house," they'd finish, and so forth. Or, "You want to give me money to be alone in a hut with no womenfolk, children, elders, or dogs, and no village standing?" "Yes," I'd say. "Why?" they'd say. Or, "Why don't you build your own house like us?" one guy might ask, and I'd say back to him, "I don't know how." "Let your father or mother or uncle help you." "Where are they? Where is your village?" "I don't have any land or people to help me." "Then you are an orphan," they would state. Or, "Why do you want to be here? Don't you pine away for your tribe?" It was inconceivable that I should want to be alone or far away from my home, and no one here could ever want either. And a man couldn't actually have a house unless he knew how to build one, which rested solely on his standing in the village, since building a house meant you were related to people who wanted you to have a house and who knew how to build one. Land wasn't simply bought or sold, but held in a complex way according to the historical relationships of long lines of ancestors. Where you lived and how you lived was a matter of the unborn and the already dead, with you forming a vital link between them. If no one knew your parents or your children, you had no home, no relationship, no link to the village dynamic. You were then an orphan. The whole modern culture was an orphan culture, a place with a lot of houses and no village. You couldn't simply buy your way into being at home here. You had to become a relative to belong. And oh, how I long to belong here and to be at home. To get a house, you had to come from a house to begin with. I had neither. So Martin goes on to talk about how the orphans, whether they be adults that sort of come into the village, which was actually a pretty rare thing, or children who lost their parents, or for whatever reason they were orphaned, a lot of them either ended up living with the wealthier, materially wealthier people in the village, or actually with the shaman. And so Martin goes on to describe how the shaman sort of lived in this compound that was a little bit away from the village, up actually on the volcano. And it wasn't that he was trying to be segregated from the people. It's that the shaman took in all the orphans. So the shaman literally had 4 wives. And I know that's really foreign to our culture. But 3 of his wives were the same age as him. And the 4th one was considerably younger. And she was the one whose role actually really it was to help with the day-to-day living of tending to many orphaned children and people that lived in the shaman's house. So you can imagine being responsible for several people, the feeding and the cleaning up after. You definitely would probably want more than 1 wife to help with that. So he goes on in the book to talk about his time with the shaman and the things that he learned, and it's just a really amazing book. But the thing that I took away from this particular section of it is the idea that community building and village life really are not necessarily the same things. And I think that community building itself is probably inherent to shamanism. Everybody that's following a shamanic path is likely going to be searching for community and trying to build community. Everybody is coming at it with different personality, different experiences, different skills. So they're going to have a different expression, a different parts of the shamanic archetype that sort of piece together to make the constellation of each unique person. So no 2 people are alike. And I'm not trying to say like everybody on a shamanic path should be community building. But in a sense, yes, I think that everybody is community building on some level with their skills and abilities that they have. But I think that if we're trying to do this, if this is our particular skill set, and I do believe it's mine, I'm very community focused. I came out of social work, and that's a very community integrated approach to assisting people and finding resolutions to their problems and meeting their needs. So I come from that already, and I have that in me. Community building is something that's very important to me. It's definitely something that I'm trying to do with the Medicine Lodge for the Veterans, is build community, and I just think it's so essential. But I'm seeing, as I'm reading this, and I'm thinking a lot about community building, how there really is a distinction between community building and village life. And if we are community builders, and that is part of our shamanic expression, I think that we have to be very mindful of this distinction. It's very easy to sort of sit back behind this screen and you see my talking face and I read your comments and, all this electronic medium. Well, it's been awesome and it's connected me to people that I probably would have never, ever had the opportunity to connect to without the technology. It's still, by the same token, while it's opening up our lines of communication and our access to information, it's also still within this framework of this post-industrial nuclear family isolationist kind of model. Because at this point, I'm just a talking face, a person behind a computer screen. And, you might think because you see me and you hear me that you have some level of connection, or I may think the same about you, that we have some level of connection. In reality, I'm still behind my locked door in my home and you're still behind your locked door in your home. And so we're still living this very isolationist culture, which is very, very different from village culture. In village culture, it's a much more communal environment, and they don't have doors. The huts that they lived in, they don't have doors to them, and he talks a little bit about that in the book as well, that they actually don't even have a name for the word door in their language. They have doorways because, their huts have doorways, but the doorways are seen in a very unique way to their culture, very differently than ours. And the doorways do not have doors in them. So there's an opening, for people to come and go. And I think that that's reflective really of the heart of village life. And I think, when we're trying to build community, it's important that we keep this in mind. And I think it's essential to work on building community locally, not just, online or, through whatever, means, even out in the community sometimes that can be very isolationist. I mean, really, really like opening our doors and leaving them open, to the comings and goings. I mean, quite literally. Not our internet doors, not our Facebook doors or our YouTube doors or our Instagram doors or our Twitter doors or, our Snapchat doors or our Skype doors. I'm not talking about that. I mean, literally the physical manifestation of where we're living in our community and our neighborhoods. It's a foreign concept to us, but I think that it's important if we're trying to be in leadership roles and teaching roles and stepping out and community building, we do have to start building that locally in our literal community. I'm not trying to brag on myself, but I will say that we've had 19 foster kids come in and out of our home. My children were at home, particularly the two younger ones, living with us when we were having these kids coming in and going out of our home. So it was a constant sort of, adjustment. And you have to have very loose boundaries, in a sense. Your circle can't be tight and it can't be tightly defined. I know a lot of people in our culture, they really define family by blood ties and bloodlines, and I think because of the degree of abandonment that I've experienced in my own life, I learned very early on how to seek out roles in relationships with people that might not be actually blood related. So I had several different women in my life that served as a mother role. They came in and went out, and it was very fluid. And the same with father figures. I've had several different men that have served like a brother role to me, coming in and kind of going out, as relationships sort of ebb and flow. And you meet their needs and they meet yours. And it's sort of an open, and none of those people that have technically gone out of my life in the sense that I don't hear from them anymore, we don't communicate anymore. None of those relationships ended like abruptly with, some sort of traumatic, emotional, it was just sort of this gentle flowing that we drifted apart, and my door's still open to any of those people. But that's kind of how it's been, for me my whole life, is that ebb and flow of people kind of coming in and going out and serving different roles for me and I for them as well. And so I had to learn to define my family very early on by things that weren't related to biology or blood or, ties that were of any of that. And so that openness, I think, helped us adjust to life as being foster parents and having 19 different personalities and different experiences and, racially and culturally and socioeconomically and, psychologically. Even religious, all these different people come into and go out of our home, and to be able to stay open to that and fluid to that and adjusting to that and accepting of that. I learned a lot from it, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. I actually would still be doing that in my local community if I had the situation. We were fortunate enough when we lived in California that we had a very, very large house. We had 5 bedrooms. We had the space, and we made good money, and so we were able to actually financially accommodate, that constant inflow and outflow of children. So again, I'm not trying to like brag on myself and say, "Oh, look, I'm so awesome. Look at everything I've done." I'm demonstrating it to say that's one of 100,000 different things that you can do in your local community to actually not have a door, on your house, in a sense, and to being open and to live in a more village way of life. I think that this sort of shamanic impulse that's raising up, we're seeing more and more people coming out saying, I'm shaman, I'm on a shaman path, or they're really identifying with it. And, a lot of people will think, oh, that's just a fad, in 10, 20 years from now, that's going to go away. Maybe so, I don't know. But I can tell you this, that I really firmly believe that there's a reason that this shamanic impulse is really rising up and it's so strong in our culture right now. Because we truly are, as Martin says in this book, we truly are an orphan culture. We are living in an orphan culture. One of my most beloved mentors is Stephen Jenkinson, and he actually calls his school the Orphan Wisdom School. So that's what that's about, that orphan wisdom, and that's exactly how Stephen's using it in that sense of, that we are an orphan culture. And a lot of his work, although it is around death, because death is a huge part of our culture that we are denying, we live in a death denial culture, very tragic. So a lot of the work that he's doing is in trying to restore the dignity, the God-given right, the cultural place for the experience of death. But he's coming at it from that fundamental aspect of we are an orphan culture. So, if you're doing shamanic work and you're doing community building, I think there should really be, a sense of that not only are, we in this post-industrial nuclear family isolationist culture, but we're an orphaned culture. And so part of the shamanic work is to assist people in no longer becoming orphans. If that means the shaman takes responsibility for all the orphans, as the shaman that Martin studied with in Guatemala, then maybe so. Or teaching people the value and importance of community building in a village life sort of way locally. And I think that really comes from the archaic impulse, which is very sort of co-entwined with the shamanic impulse, this archaic impulse that's also springing up in people. We see it more and more with people that are like trying to organically garden, turning their lawns into organic gardens, and, people that are learning how to survive off the grid, live independently, without modern conveniences or without being part of a system in some way. We see this more and more and more. And this, to me, it speaks to the archaic impulse that's also rising up in people. So I really think that that's what a big part of that archaic impulse is. It's that desire that we have deep within us to sort of get back to this simpler, more connected way of life, connected with each other, connected with our immediate environment, the earth beneath our feet, the trees amongst us, the animals that live there. And I think that we're feeling this calling. A lot of people are feeling this calling. And I think for a lot of us, it's really entwined with that shamanic impulse. The archaic impulse and the shamanic impulse are so closely tied together that they can almost be inseparable at times, really. And so I just want to really encourage you in that, to consider not only the differences between, community building and village life, but especially if you're on a shamanic path and you feel the calling towards community building, to consider the ways that you can really be like the village in your local community. The ways that you can, like, literally and also figuratively take the door off and then just have, this open sort of flowing of resources, whatever those are that you're willing to give and able to give. And I know it's hard. It's really hard. I recently had my son bring home a young 18-year-old girl with really significant needs and issues that was homeless. And we're not in a position financially, nor do we have sort of the emotional resources to really help her. But I couldn't turn her away. So we brought her in, and I turned to my local community and said, hey, is, can anybody help me kind of shoulder this burden? Help me to help this girl, and I was really disappointed in that people didn't really have a sense of obligation or responsibility. And so nobody really did truly step up to the plate to help us. And that situation resolved itself, and she was on the path that she needed to be on, as we were on the path that we need to be on. But going through that really frustrating time for me, it really showed me how we lack community. But more than that, we lack the village mentality in our communities. So even our community building, we're doing it from this very nuclear family isolationist culture. And we have to figure out a way to drop that, to completely drop that, to get rid of it, to reshape it and rebuild it into a more village way of life. And I know that sounds very utopian. I'm not trying to say like, here's the Holy Grail and this is going to save humanity, because I think that village life itself is very hard. It's not easy, everybody sort of sinks or swims together. They sort of eat or starve together. They experience the rain or the drought together. And so there's downsides to living communally, and especially coming out of a very isolationist nuclear family culture, it's particularly challenging to do that level of work. But I think it's important. And again, I'm not saying, oh, we should all be going out starting a bunch of hippie communes and living together. I'm not saying that either. If that's the form it takes, great, then that's the form it takes. But I think that we have to find a way to get more village-like in our mentality. They say it takes a village to raise a child, and I really do firmly believe that. I really believe in that. But I don't think that most people do believe in that. They come home, they kind of shut the door, lock it, put their blinds down, and they just think like, this is it. This is my domain. I'm the king of my castle. This is the only thing I'm responsible to and the only people I'm obligated to. And oh, my neighbor down the street, he's struggling financially. He's about to lose his house. Oh, I'm sorry for him. That sucks. Life sucks, right? Too bad. I think there's a different way to be. And, I think if we're on the shamanic path and we're into community building, it's kind of our calling, that we have to be mindful of that, that it's more than just giving lip service to the idea of community, but really like where the rubber meets the road, taking our own doors off the hinges, literally, if that's what it takes, or figuratively, if that's what it takes. To open our resources up and to give everything that we have to give. And I know how hard it is, and I'm not expecting anybody else to do it. I'm just saying this is me and what I've been called to do. I just want to encourage you to consider, what you might do in your community to raise the level of consciousness, to meet the need, to try to usher in that archaic, more village, connected to the earth, connected to the environment, connected to my neighbors, connected to, the trees and everything, the animals and everything that's in my natural immediate environment, connecting to that in a way that's more harmonious and more reflective of that village lifestyle. So anyway, I hope I encouraged you. I hope that you're having a great day. As always, if you have comments or questions, concerns, whatever, leave it down below the video, and I definitely will get back to you. If you want to keep that private, then you should by now know all the different ways that you can get a hold of me. So I love you guys so much, and thank you for watching.